So, hello everyone, thank you for coming to our presentation. My name is Nina, I am one of the 5 initiative, one of the students who took the initiative to start the referendum. And
hello, I'm Luca from Kamp. I'm one of the other initiative takers of the referendum, and we're with 5, but 3 of us are not here now, so I also want to thank them, I guess. Let's just say what I study, I guess. I have a bachelor's degree in computer science, and I'm currently studying logic with a focus on complexity theory, computational theory, stuff like that, so yeah.
And I'm studying industrial design at the TU Eindhoven with a focus on how new digital technologies impact society. I'd say we've prepared a little talk about the collection of bulk data and the analysis of that. But we kept it minimal, so we go to the panel fast.
Yeah, and the technical stuff might be really trivial for you guys. I'm sorry. We just, I don't know. Okay, that's it.
So, why did we take all this effort to have a referendum and make the country angry? So, the new law, it was necessary. The old spying law was from 2002, I believe. And for this new law, the AIVD needed tapping cable net traffic, which is important because we've all moved on into new technologies. But then our problem is in the new capabilities that this law allows for, and these are, we summed up a few. The untargeted mass interception of cable traffic and the automated analysis of that, which also includes databases from, for example, companies or the tax agency, which was also in the news recently. Then there is also the hacking of third parties, which is a problem with zero-day collection, but that's a discussion for another day. And then the sharing of this intelligence with foreign agencies, which might be from repressive authorities. And we're going to focus on the first 2 bits now. So, okay, for example, say the AIVD believes that in this one area there might be a terrorist, and they decide to start tapping data from there. A big example, for example, the Amsterdam Internet Exchange would be, I would say that would be a nice place to intercept. And then they have all of this data, but obviously they can't store that, so they have to filter and then see who the possible suspects might be. And a lot of our opponents say that's where the crux is, because the AIVD is only interested in the data of possible terrorists. However, filtering out terrorists from bulk data is not magic. It's algorithms, and we believe that the way they extract this data is problematic.
Yeah, okay, so I guess I will now, in short, explain how a big data collection works, but I guess some of you already know this. So there's basically 2 ways I can think of that you could find terrorists, and both are allowed according to the law, or the new law. So there's both classification and pattern recognition, I guess. And so in classification, you try and find certain classes of people, or sets of people, and label them accordingly. So I guess what they want to do is build up a profile of this is what makes a terrorist or something in some weird way, and then try and apply this to a big data set they have. And then there's pattern recognition, where they're going to use the big data to find hidden patterns in the data. For example, maybe if you have all these properties, then you are a potential terrorist. I don't know. And I guess the most used algorithms for this are either support vector machines, regression, or some neural network or something. And yeah, this is the article. It's just we underlined. It's all in Dutch. I'm sorry. So I hope some of you speak Dutch. I don't know. It's the underlined bits are the bits where it says this stuff is allowed. And then we think at least this kind of method to catch terrorists is in a way very ineffective. So first of all, they have to have a data set to find like these patterns or these things that make a terrorist. So they need like a learning set, and I guess the learning set of terrorists is very small because there are just not that many terrorists at all, and the amount they know of before they catch them, so before the information flow stops, is also very small, I guess, I hope. And then there's the problem of errors, false positives, false negatives. I guess the most harmful here are false positives, where people are tagged or flagged as terrorists without them being actual terrorists. And so the problem is that they will probably want to try and find as much terrorists as possible. So they want to keep down the false negatives, so the terrorists that they actually don't flag. And by doing this, they will most likely or almost certainly increase the false positives they have. And then there's the problem with the pattern matching and even the classification itself, where the patterns you find are like correlations, like statistical correlations between certain like properties or a property vector and if it's a terrorist or not, but they're not causal connections. So you need like a big team of humans that will like investigate why does this algorithm say this guy is a terrorist. And I mean, without this causal connection, it's both dubious as to if you want to follow it up, and it's both, I think, even illegal to follow it up. So I don't know what they want to do with the data. I don't know.
And also the WRR stands for Wetenschappelijke Raad voor Regeringsbeleid, and these are the people who check whether government policy has roots in scientific research. And they also stated that the learning database for terrorists to create an efficient profile is too small to be effective in this law. Okay, so and why do we think this is dangerous? Well, first of all, focusing with this law on untargeted surveillance and the analysis of that, it drains the resources from a type of surveillance that is actually effective, that is proven to be effective, which is traditional targeted surveillance. So, for example, you could target the mother of a terrorist and not necessarily in an enormous crowd of people. So that's a money issue. And also the Council of Europe has also said that we need more investments in traditional targeted surveillance. That's also what we would like to see if the referendum says a no, and people might change the law.
And also I'd like to add to this, because of the false positives problem I explained before, there will be like a big set of people that are potential terrorists, even like maybe like in a couple of thousand, so they still need some group of people that can enact or like apply traditional methods, and it could be dangerous that these people will be like smaller or less experienced or whatever because of the change in investment to big data analysis. So yeah.
And on the other hand, it also makes us less safe because it harms our human rights, and Doutje is going to explain more about that. But one thing I would like to highlight is the last one, the freedom of thought. When we know that we are being watched, we will change our behavior. When you know that, for example, Googling, I don't know, anarchism on Google could have a consequence, you will no longer look up opinions that might divert from the common ideas. And this is very harmful for society. But yeah, we're gonna let Doutje explain all that.
Okay,
yes.
That's it. And I'm hoping for some questions or something.
Maybe we can leave the questions for the panel discussion. Yes. Okay. Is there one question, two questions for now before we go to the panel?
Some clarifications, maybe.
I just have one question. I've signed, by the way, but the thing is, like, I understand I've worked as a consultant for the government as well, and the problem is if they don't have anything to catch them, we still have terrorist attacks in Belgium, Paris, and those kind of things. And even if they were spotted on the radar, they were still down in the deep web where they couldn't find anybody. What suggestions do you have? Like, how can we find them then?
I don't have any suggestions. I'm not an expert on catching terrorists, but I think if they're in the deep web or whatever, they're this like technically capable. I don't think this kind of surveillance would work because I guess mostly what they will collect is metadata or unencrypted data, and they won't even have like a clue as to what this guy is doing.
All right, you see behaviors starting up before somebody becomes
Before someone even becomes technically capable to be a terrorist.
Yeah, and then they are still in the top
Yes, but
web, so they can
so
play
then
them.
I guess then the critics we show still apply, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just curious.
Yeah.
So.
Thanks.
Yeah, cool.
So I would like to start by asking you, who of you has filed a request for the public referendum? Can I see some hands? That's quite a bit. And if there would be, if there will be, today it was announced, there will be a public referendum next year, March. Whom of you would vote against the Dragnet Surveillance Act? Wow, that's very impressive. So it's a very privacy-minded audience. I'm happy to see that. I assume that the rest has not taken a position or is in favor of the law.
But
well,
can you also ask who would not vote against it?
Okay, so who would not vote against the law? Who would vote in favor of the law? This will be the question.
And remember, if you're not going to say, they already know.
Exactly, perfect. Okay, so that's two, and I assume that the rest hasn't decided yet or won't vote, etc. So the Christian Democrat leader has already announced that, in his opinion, the government will probably neglect the referendum anyway, and that the government should also neglect the referendum because it's a tool that we will abolish. And this has also been Amnesty International's experience over the past 2.5 years. We have been lobbying on this bill with a lot of other civil society actors, companies and activists to make it human rights compliant, and basically most of our concerns were dismissed. And that's also why Amnesty decided to support the campaign of the 5 students. Once they hit the threshold that the referendum would come, we started basically supporting them with campaigning. And yes, today it was announced that it will come. Our motivation was, first of all, it's a democratic tool to start to shape the bill. If it's, we can express our concerns once again, and if the government will listen, hopefully the bill will be improved if the majority of the Dutch will vote against the bill, of course. And second of all, to actually shape the public debate, because the past 2.5 years there was hardly any public debate on the bill, let alone on the human rights consequences of the bill. And we consider this as a very important tool, and it has already been, because I think we now see the public debate emerging, and that's great. So I'm going to talk you through to 3 of our main concerns from Amnesty International's perspective. And also on, it's more of a legal story, but it will echo with the previous presentation. So, yes, these are 3 of our main concerns. The untargeted surveillance powers that are being created, the improved but still inadequate oversight mechanisms, and the inadequate safeguards for international cooperation. First of all, as Christian also, Richard, sorry Richard. Richard also said data has power, and we're here to hold power to account. And there's a lot of human rights at stake. It's not only privacy, it's not only freedom of expression, but it's also freedom of thought. As Nina said, I feel a chilling effect of surveillance in expressing my thoughts online, on my computer, on my phone. It's also the right to access information. Are you still feeling free to access all the information that you want if you think that, hey, I might be associated with crime if I do this? So lots of concerns from a human rights perspective. Of course, these human rights are not absolute. There are legitimate reasons to sometimes restrict those human rights, but then you need to fulfill certain conditions. Such as, sometimes surveillance can be legitimate, can restrict these human rights, when it's based on a reasonable suspicion of wrongdoing. So it means the government needs to have at least a ground that the communication that they're intercepting is related to people or groups or specific networks that they associate with wrongdoing. They have a reasonable suspicion. It should be authorized by law, so it should be in a clear and foreseeable law. Which powers they create and when they can create it and for how long they can collect the data, these things. and also it should be authorized by an independent judicial authority, which is often a judge. And most important, the government needs to prove that it's absolutely necessary in a democratic society to meet a legitimate aim. Well, national security can be such a legitimate aim, but then still the surveillance, the interception of our data and the infringement of our privacy needs to be proportionate, and it's up to the government to show that the surveillance powers they're creating are actually proportionate. Okay, then I go to the bill. Or it's a law actually, because it's already been adopted. Given, of course, international human rights law requiring it needs to be targeted, then dragnet or mass surveillance can never be a proportionate infringement of the human rights. But this bill is not necessarily creating a mass surveillance power, but possibly a mass surveillance power in disguise. And I'm going to try to explain why, and it kind of echoes with what you already tried to explain before. First of all, the law creates a so-called case-specific interception, but we don't know what it means. It's not being defined what case-specific actually means, what it implies. So case-specific can be a huge case, we don't know. It's at least not targeted at a specific individual. It's not targeted as a specific group. It's related to a certain purpose, a certain case. When the Minister of Interior was actually asked in a parliamentary debate whether this would allow certain indiscriminate surveillance, his reply was, well, the law does not exclude systematic large-scale interception of communication data. So that's very clear. It can be systematic, it can be large scale, this case-specific interception. Hence, it's untargeted, and that's why we think it might be a mass surveillance in disguise. It also means that it creates powers to intercept data of non-targets, of people against whom there is not a reasonable suspicion that they're associated with crime or the preparation of crime or a certain national security threat. So it basically means the government can intercept our data and follow our online communications. Then the question is, of course, is this really necessary? Because it's, if international human rights law says, well, first of all, the government needs to explain that it's necessary. According to us, they didn't explain why the existing powers in place were insufficient to reach that same legitimate aim of national security. Because in the existing bill, there was already a targeted surveillance power. They didn't explain why this existing bill was insufficient, and they also didn't explain whether there were less human rights infringing opportunities possible to reach the same aim. So we don't think that this bill meets the criteria of necessity and proportionality. Then this second mass surveillance powers in disguise is the real-time access to databases of third parties, where you talked about. Any third party, it's not defined in the law again, can be asked to provide the services voluntarily with direct automated access to their databases. So it indeed means travel companies or tax services, we don't know. Of course they have to give consent, but after that they can also intercept, or maybe not intercept, but at least analyze our data, which are in that database. There's no prior judicial authorization required, so it's basically leaving human rights up to the companies to decide, or other institutions. As for the second point of critique, how much time do I have? Okay, a few minutes. It's of course very, what I said, data is power and we need to be able to hold power into account. That's why external, full, independent, effective oversight of the intelligence services is very important. In the first draft bill that was submitted, the security services were allowed to intercept our data if the Minister of Interior authorized it. But the Minister of Interior is also the boss of the intelligence services. So we critiqued that, of course, with many other actors. And in the second bill that was tabled, this particular part was significantly improved. So that's why we think the law has improved in comparison to the first one, because it created a body, it's called the TIP, It exists of 2 former judges and a tech expert, and they need to review the decision of the minister. So the minister says, okay, it's fine, intercept those data, or no, it's not fine because it's not proven necessary or proportionate. So this is a good improvement, but we still have some concerns about this tip, about its independence and effectiveness. I won't go into details. And also because after the operation has been conducted, there's another oversight body, but that can only give advices. So if that oversight body says, hey, the security service actually made a mistake, that wasn't legitimate what they did, the minister can actually ignore this. And he also said it. He said, well, when I disagree with the findings of that oversight body, I want to be able to act against those recommendations. So we're not sure how strong that oversight is, and let alone the oversight by the parliament, which is of course very politicized. Finally, a major concern from Amnesty's perspective, because we're an international human rights organization, is the sharing of data with foreign governments. A good thing is that the bill requires, or the act requires, that the intelligence services must do an assessment prior to sharing data in bulk with other governments, because that's new. Before they could share some restricted information, now they can share in bulk. Notably respect for human rights, but it's the intelligence services checking on other intelligence services, so we're not sure how that assessment will look like. Most important is that the law even says no foreign secret services is excluded. Data can be shared with services from countries with little respect of human rights, and also data can be shared that hasn't been analyzed prior to sharing. So it can include all data, wrong data, false data, in particular data on very sensitive groups, for instance, prosecuted groups are activists or dissidents, and that's a major concern. So we think this bill should be improved, and that's why we supported the campaign.
Thank you. Now it's time for the fourth discussion. We have about half an hour for this. So if I can invite you to the stage, also Peter Koop. Richard, you have some stools behind you, right? So I think it's good to put them here. And this is a very sensitive topic, right? I mean, we now have heard, maybe you can put it here. I will put the mic, I will use the mic like this and hand it over to you. It's a sensitive topic. What I understand is that the law should go into effect on the 1st of January, but due to a lack of sufficient commissioners, it is postponed. And also the referendum will be held in March. Yeah, 21st of March, the referendum will be held. And the law should go into effect now in May, 1st of May. So we have some time to think about the pros and the cons. We've heard, that's in the position of the cons against this law. Maybe there are people also who have a position about the pros of the law. I would like to have a good discussion. Maybe let me start with the first question, and then I leave it up to the audience to have follow-up questions on this. So my question is, I mean, we are all on Facebook, on Twitter, on social media, etc. We share tons of information about ourselves, about our life, about what we're doing. And who knows who will handle that information? Some 4 or 5 big companies worldwide. They can do whatever they want with that information. Why should we be so protective about our information we share it freely with other commercial parties? So who can I give the mic to?
Well, so first of all, you can decide to not use Facebook or Google. It's hard, but it's a choice that you can make. And aside from that, Facebook and Google are commercial companies, and the government is our government, and they are there to protect us. And right now they are harming our human rights, which is very unokay. So that's also a problem. And you cannot decide, for example, to extract your medical data from the cable. That's already being done. So it's about much more than just the things you look at that maybe Facebook or Google might look at. And then also, echoing back to the false flag that we mentioned, if you are a false positive in Facebook, you might see an advertisement for wine instead of beer. If you are a false positive in the analysis of the AIVD, you're in much bigger trouble. So the stakes are way higher when it's government surveillance in comparison to commercial surveillance.
Okay, thanks, Beth. Any other follow-up answer?
Yeah, just a quick one. I mean, two wrongs don't make a right. I mean, we should be concerned with the data that we share with companies as well. But the big difference is, of course, it's you deciding which data you share and which data is being collected. Whereas with government surveillance, it's secret, it's hidden, it's undercover. And then at least the government needs to show why it's infringing on my privacy to, for instance, protect my national security.
Well, on the contrary, one thing is that the data collected by the commercial companies, there's no oversight over what they are doing with their data. Especially the big companies in the US, they're completely free to do whatever they like with it. While on the other hand, the data collected by the secret services are controlled by democratic institutions and also the judiciary. So that's also a big difference. And we also should take into account, I think, is that if you look at privacy implications, then we have to be concerned, but we also should look at other government institutions, like, for example, the police or the tax office or other institutions, because they collect probably much more data than the secret services do, but without, for example, the independent oversight we have for the secret services. So that's my take.
That's my take. So let me give the questions open to the audience to have some other views, some other perspective. Is anybody who has a question? Yes, here.
I'm also working in the ad tech companies for where the false positives are coming from. The false positives are coming because of lack of data. They only have an identifier and they start building a profile based on you. But the moment when I give my iPad to my daughter, for example, I'm getting a profile with Paw Patrol, for example, while I don't care about it. So what I'm trying to say is that the problem for those companies is the amount of data they have, and to even process that costs them so much money. So they say, like, okay, that 30% loss or waste that you call false positive is because they cannot process that. What's your take on that? Do you see it like that as well, or are you seeing it like they have all the data because they have problems to process it at this moment?
Who would like to take that question?
Well, first of all, I think, I guess the same applies to the AIVD, I guess, because they need to process the data, but I also think it's not only a quantitative problem, but also a qualitative problem. So I think companies have less of a false positive problem because they have more data about us, I guess. And the AIVD cannot, well, at least they say they will only look at metadata, and I think that's less of like an indication of what you are. So I guess there will be more false positives. And also, as I said before, the amount of actually positive people, or positive like targets, is very small. So I guess this problem would even be bigger. Yeah. Is that enough?
We talked about big data, you explained it, but I think maybe we are overestimating the capabilities of especially the Dutch services. Like for example, even from the Snowden revelations, we know a lot about what the British and the Americans are doing, and what we see there is that the kind of big data analysis Luca explained, they hardly are doing that kind of things. It's much more focused on like things like contact chaining on metadata, and then focusing in on existing data, much more smaller data sets. So the kind of profiling, I don't think especially the Dutch services, won't have the capability and the kind of large data set you need for that. So I think we should think not in that kind of categories for if it comes on big data sets.
Vincent, I will run the mic from one end to the other. If there are some questions on this area, that's more convenient.
Yeah, I agree with you. I talked to William Buckley from the NSA, who used to work for the NSA, and he said they are fantastic in getting lots of information, but extremely bad at analyzing it. But from the panel, does anybody have a law, here in Europe, of a country which is a little bit similar to us? Scandinavia, or just some decent country which has a good law, which combines respect for human rights and also the ability to do a little bit more for our intelligence, because the NSA is already knowing everything, we know that. They don't do anything much about it, but is there a good law which is decent?
Unfortunately, the answer is no. Not in Europe. We're studying the surveillance powers that are being rapidly being created in the UK and France and other countries in Europe, and unfortunately, all the laws fall short on explaining the necessity and proportionality of the powers they create, and especially in terms of oversight, there are major lacunas in the bills or laws in other countries. So that's why we try to improve it, because we think it's possible to have targeted surveillance that is effective in protecting national security while also respecting human rights, to fight terrorism while respecting the rule of law. It's not a trade-off, they should go hand in hand, and it's up to the government to actually do that if they take human rights seriously.
So write a good law, write a good concept law.
Well, this law, this particular dragnet surveillance law, or the Act on the Intelligence and Security Services, the WIF, could potentially be a good law. We're not necessarily against the law or against surveillance or against creating powers to protect our national security. In opposition to that, in contradiction, we want that, of course, also. Without security, we cannot live our human rights. So it would be great if the government would have a proper dialogue with us and seriously hundreds of other actors, experts from different fields, from companies, from academia, from civil society, who have given very proper advices and recommendations, which have gone through Parliament. There were hundreds of amendments to the bill, and only 2 have been accepted, or 3. So it's possible. Take us seriously, and that's why we think we need this debate also, because the government is just hiding or shielding itself behind this too easy argument. We need it to protect our national security. No, come with a better law that protects our security and our human rights.
Well, I want to add that, in my opinion, the law isn't that bad actually, as my other panel colleagues think, because it's true that the law doesn't explain why, how the dragnet or the untargeted surveillances will be used, but that's of course because the secret services, they need some freedom in to operate. They are operating in kind of catching terrorists and other kind of bad people who are the most difficult people to catch and to trace, so they need kind of freedom. But in the law it's explicitly stated that every operation that the secret services are conducting has to be necessary according to the law, have to be proportionate, and the measures they are taken, they should be the most least intrusive possible. So I think, in my opinion, if you have those criteria, that will make sure that the services will act as targeted as possible. So in my opinion, there are some things that should be improved in the law, also in my opinion, but I think it's not that bad as some other people think.
Thank you. I have the feeling in this panel we have a right side and a left side, and Amnesty exactly in the middle, right? So maybe let's see how it works out. Sure. So let's see how it works out during the next quarter of an hour. I saw another question here on this side.
I watched the NSA facility built in America, one of them, and aside from the economic or the environmental holocaust that 1 million liters of water is used to cool the facility, how do we combat the creative legislation that they created by saying that capturing of all this data is not actually interception because nobody's actually looking at the data? So they end up with a vault for 10 or 15 years of data, and they never intercept anything unless they actively decide somebody is a target. How do we prevent something like that happening? Because I see that as the greatest risk of all.
Thanks. Who would like to take this question? Any volunteers, Peter?
Yeah, well,
And
you're.
this side as well, right?
I guess you're talking about the Utah data center. Yeah. The very interesting thing is that we heard a lot from Snowden about what NSA is doing, but we heard nothing about the Utah data center. So yeah, that's a strange thing, but I think we have no idea what NSA actually is doing with the data center. So it's pure speculation about their purposes with that, and we should also take into account that the data they are collecting, they are duplicating and triplicating their data for special analysis purposes. So they're requiring much more storage capacity than the data they actually collect. So there are many other purposes and things we should take into account if we think about those large data centers. But I think you are worried about if that could happen here in Holland. Well, as I said, everything our secret services may do should be proportionate. So I'm not that worried that would happen here. And of course, we have the parliamentary oversight.
I mean, it's not defined in the law how to make this proportionate. And even if you say, well, our intelligence services, don't be so scared of them because they don't have these capabilities. I mean, the capability to store all this data as they do in the United States. If you're creating the powers, the legal powers that they can actually do so, why exclude the idea that this is possible in the future? So make sure that the law circumvents this by making it targeted, by defining what case specific exactly means, that it's a person or a group, that indeed there's a reasonable suspicion of wrongdoing. It's not defined in the law. Now they can make such databases. I'm extremely concerned that these databases can also be hacked, you know, from a national security perspective. Who has interest in that data? Well, I think Russia or Iran would be very interested in that data. So I think they should really make sure that the data that they need, okay, but other data, erase it immediately or don't intercept it in the first place.
Yeah, I think this is a very important point because a lot of times you hear you have to trust the government with the data that they get because we live in an open democratic society. But we are very lucky in the Netherlands that we don't build our country on trust. We build it on a word I haven't found a good translation for, a rechtsstaat, which means that a rule of law. Okay, thank you. Learned something new. So we base our entire society on the rule of law, and then to introduce this law and then argue that we can accept it based on a trust for a government is very, very erosive to our democratic society, in my opinion. So with all those things that you might say, yeah, it could happen, but probably not, then state that clearly in the rule of law, and then we'll be happy.
Thanks. We have room for 2 more questions. Okay.
Up here.
Up here. Oh, let's first. I mean, this section is a bit underrepresented. So if you come down, you can have the mic.
was wondering if these things already don't happen. So is this not more justification of things that already happen? I find it hard. Yeah, in the Netherlands. I find it very hard to believe that they're already not tapping cable, etc. I mean, very much surprised me, but please inform me because I'm wondering.
Doutje?
Well, then it would be illegal because they are not allowed to do so. What I said, there is this oversight body that is checking on the secret services and what they do. They make annual reports and they have also a lot of research power, so they can access all the databases and see how the operations were being conducted. Indeed, they have found several instances where the surveillance, the secret services intercepted data without having the permission, so they violated our rights. For instance, by tapping journalists and lawyers. And in order to do so, they need, in the current law, which is an improvement to the previous situation, need the authorization of a judge. And in the past, they did this without the authorization, and they were tapped on their fingers. But as what I explained before, it was an advice, it was a finding, and the minister didn't act on it.
Okay, thanks. We have the last question of the gentleman here. He could have the question, so go ahead.
Okay, so
Take the stage.
yes, I am. We've had a discussion here that is like almost entirely disconnected from reality. We're looking at a law that was created so that we don't have to trade the surveillance we collect from Germany for the data they collect from us. We know from the Snowden documents that between agencies, they freely trade private data with each other. You allow a German spy to come in the AEX, he taps it. Dutch spy goes to Germany, does the same thing there, you swap. We've been doing that for I don't know how long, but it's been very expensive for us because we're a small country.
So what's the question?
The question here is, why are we having a debate about, so you're seriously asking us, you're saying it's not a problem because they can't analyze the data. I'm not looking at, is someone a terrorist? I'm looking at, is someone gay? I'm looking at, is someone anti-government? Is someone communist? And we know for a fact that they've been looking at this stuff, like trying to figure out who's who, trying to figure out how to promote capitalism worldwide. I mean, that's like a final, it's a core goal of the CIA. That's what they've been created to do, is to promote these things.
Then we can
It's the same question as the previous.
The question is, why aren't we talking about how great it is that the Dutch government is going to profit far more from selling our private data than they do now from bartering for it?
Okay, that's good.
Well, first of all, the idea that countries are swapping data they are not allowed to collect themselves, and then that collected by foreign countries and then traded off. That's absolutely, there's no evidence for that from the Snowden documents. That's a big misconception. And also in the Dutch law, and also, like for example in German law, it's explicitly not allowed for agencies to do that. So that's.
They've been allowed to go outside the law since forever. I don't know why you even mentioned this.
Well, they are not allowed to go outside the law. The secret services are a government agency.
There is no oversight. They are allowed to do it.
Okay, that's your opinion.
That they're able to do something and not get any
No, but you're right. Oversight is extremely important, and that's why the bill needs to be improved.
Okay, I wasn't gonna stand. I want to thank you for your speech, and I also want to say we're living in changing times. Like human progression hasn't gone this fast ever in the history of humanity. We have a chance now to really make a basis for our digital human rights, because otherwise I don't know where we are going to end up. It is an extremely important moment to grab back our human rights and make a stance against the surveillance agencies, because we are not going to allow this to happen. And this debate, it might be ignored by people, but we are finally finding back our voice and we will grab back our digital human rights.
So thank you very much for a very good panel and interesting questions from the audience. I think this is really a hot topic with a lot of debate. Again, thank you very much, panel. And I hope this topic will rise up soon again, early next year, when we can vote for the referendum, yes or no. Thank you again.